Yates County, and I'm here with Lindsay Paschow and Betsy Lamb, and we are so excited today to have Tracy LaValle Hall from Firefly Floral and Design come to talk with us about Dahlia Production. And she is doing so many amazing things that I'm going to let her continue with the introduction. So take it away, Tracy.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate the intro. Like she said, my name is Tracy LaValle Hall. I'm the owner of Firefly Floral and Design. I started the business in 2016, with my first season being 2017. Um, Dahlias were not on my radar initially, and I went to a flower farm intensive in Seattle where we divided tubers and we were given some to bring home. So that's what started me. The first year, I had a handful of varieties and I just gave it a try. And apparently, I'm now hooked. The photos that you're going to see going across the screen as I speak are all dahlias that I've grown on my farm at one time or another, most of which I still have. Some of which I've lost over the years, and loss is a part of gardening, no matter where you are. Um, I guess let's just get started. We're going to start right out with talking about soil a little bit and whether or not soil testing is important. Let me just say it is. There have been years I've tested, there have been years I have not. And there's a significant difference when you get the testing done and follow the suggestions within. Those tests will tell you exactly what your soil needs for the crop that you're trying to grow. And dahlias, I want to say they're not an overly picky plant to try to grow as much as people seem to have problems. I think that the problems are just something you need to work through. So for soil testing, you can reach out to your local Cornell Cooperative Extension if you're in New York State, and in other states it's through another local college, that agricultural college, that you can get that done. And with that, you'll get back some facts about the condition of your soil and what you need to do to make it be correct for the crop that you're trying to grow. It's important to let them know what you're trying to grow in order to get the correct recommendations. When to start the dahlias. So I keep mine in a storage area in an old dairy barn. There's an old milk house that we've insulated, and I've put a heater in that I set for about 40 to 45 degrees. It only kicks on periodically, just enough to keep the frost out of the basement of the barn in that particular room. Part of that structure is underground and it is all cinder block. So it's quite thick walls. I start bumping the temperature up in there while I'm dividing to start with. So I want it to be comfortable-ish while I'm in the room. So I'll bump it up to 50 degrees initially while I'm in there so as not to wake them up too soon, because I have so many that I have to start dividing in December. But it's probably mid-April when I want them to all be showing some kind of bud. So I will start to do that the middle of March and give them 3 or 4 weeks to sort of wake up, the buds to start to swell. You have to make sure that there's a sufficient amount of moisture in your storage space in order to get those buds to swell. If it's dry, they're gonna wither up and you're gonna have desiccated tubers, which will still grow, but not as aggressively or as healthily as tubers that had sufficient moisture all winter long. So from there, by mid-April, I'm trying to have everything divided as best I can and be able to at least start shipping them out. Because I do sell dahlia tubers. So that influences my timing just a little bit. Um, I keep track of soil temperatures to determine when I'm going to put them in the ground. I want the soil temperature to be a consistent 60 degrees day and night, to not drop below 60 degrees at all for, I usually give it about 3 days to a week. Once it reaches 60 degrees and maintains it or higher, then I know it's safe to put them in. It's going to take them a couple weeks to break ground. So even if that falls the middle of May, I can get them in the ground and they're not going to poke through until after that danger of last frost is passed. But if I'm going to put them in at that time, I also have to be prepared to protect them if they do emerge prior to that last frost. So be mindful of that. Um, when I plant mine, I've done it many ways, and there are pros and cons to doing it in the various ways, depending upon your situation, your soil type, um, what time of the day they're getting shade, if at all. They need at least 6 hours of sunlight every single day in order to thrive and be healthy plants and bloom. The photo that's up right now with the cat is just a little backdrop. Those cards you can pick up online. I think I bought those ones at Joann Fabrics when it was around, but those are what I use. I have since purchased some from Amazon as well. They're what I use to photograph my dahlias, to document what they are and the actual color that I'm getting, if it's a little bit different from what I expected, especially. Okay, so back to what I plant them through. I just wanted to touch on those backdrops while the photo was up. Um, I plant, I have planted through landscape fabric. I used to plant through the 4 foot wide woven landscape fabric. I burned holes in approximately 8 inches, 8-inch holes in, and I spaced them every 2 feet. That's what I did when I first started. I did 2 rows about probably 18 inches apart, but I staggered them so that they were indeed 2 feet apart from the center of each hole. Um, and it was helpful. It was helpful with weeds. There was less weeding up close to the plant. I think it suppressed a little bit the ability for the Japanese beetles to get out and do as much damage as quickly. But it also baked the plants in the sun. As you know, here we get 90 to 100-degree days, and you have to irrigate, and you're lucky if your irrigation makes it into the soil quick enough when you are fighting against black reflecting from the sun. So the next year, I tried putting the landscape fabric in the walkways, figuring I would be reducing a little bit of my weed pressure, and then I could just weed at the base of the plants. You can't keep up with that many weeds. I couldn't keep up with that many weeds. Um, so while it was effective in the sense that I had clean walkways, um, 4 foot wide landscape fabric in the walkways, and then the growing area was about 2 feet wide. However, I was growing well over 1,000 dahlias doing it that way, and that's a lot of ground to cover. Um, so if you can keep up with that, then God bless you. And now I've switched again. Last year, I did the landscape fabric in the walkways. I tried to narrow it down a little bit and did 3 foot, which wasn't wide enough. By mid-September, it was difficult to walk down between the rows. So this year we've gone back to 4 foot walkways. I've eliminated landscape fabric altogether. I know that sounds contrary to my previous statement about the weeds getting the better of me. However, we've connected with a local uh, tree company that fells trees, and they bring us their wood chips. The ones that we used this year are 3 years old. They happen to have a decent stockpile, and we were able to get some older stuff. From this point forward, we'll have them deliver and we'll let them age here on the farm. I have mulched not only the plants themselves, but the walkways, and heavy enough in the walkways so that it has really helped suppress the weeds quite a bit. I didn't use anything as a pre-emergent. Um, it's something I'll consider in the future, just an over-the-counter preen maybe, but it's not something we've done so far. I did the same thing in my annual flower rows. I put the mulch down in the walkways, removed the landscape fabric walkways, and the annual flowers are planted through landscape fabric, but they grow quicker and have enough foliage covering, and it shades that fabric so that it doesn't bake things quite as badly as the slow growing dahlias. It's fine once they're bigger, but they grow too slow, in my opinion, for that to be beneficial. So far, the mulch is doing exactly what I wanted it to. The first field that we planted, we waited until after the plants emerged a little bit to add the mulch. The second field, we did it as soon as we put them in. And I have to say the second is definitely the better for me. I have a sandy loam soil and I plant on a drumlin. So I'm not looking at soggy wet spots like many people are. I would not recommend mulch to somebody who is going to be planting in ground that is even slightly overly moist to prevent any kind of tuber rot. If you hold too much moisture too soon, then you have issues with the tubers rotting in the ground. Um, so as far as pests, I feel like it's a losing battle most of the time. I've found that the organza bags work well for the dahlias, especially if you have an event or a specific thing that you're cutting the flowers for that you know is coming up. If you want to show your blooms, definitely do organza bags to keep the thrips and leaf hoppers and Japanese beetles and all the monsters out of them. I just saw the question pop up here. If you have soil that holds a lot of water or pools a lot of water. So if you're trying to plant dahlias in that situation, you're going to have a problem right from the beginning. Um, you're not going to get the drainage needed in order for the dahlias to thrive. They may rot before they get big enough to really put out any blooms. And if that's the only place that you have to grow, you can consider growing in pots or you can consider raised beds. Even long rows of what would be considered a raised bed just with soil. Just hill it like you were hilling it for potatoes and try to grow them that way. So basically you'd be placing your tuber at approximately ground level and hilling the soil above in order to prevent the tuber from sitting in standing water at any given time. It's definitely an option. Um, and if you're going to grow in pots, make sure you're growing in big enough pots. You're going to want it to be probably at least 18 inches across on the pot in order to accommodate. There are certain varieties. One that comes to mind is Ferncliff Inspiration. The tubers, when I dig them up, are easily 18 to 20 inches end to end. So half of that distance is the length of one tuber, and it's growing in a circle, so it needs that much space. And over time, you'll learn which tubers are bigger, which ones are smaller, and that's one of my talking points later about spacing. Um, but that is one way you can mitigate the water problem is to grow them in hills. Um, I will go through and use an insecticidal soap if need be. I try to choose organic choices as much as possible. I exhaust all organic means first, always. Um, so prepping and storing for the winter. Let me just see here. I want to do this in an order that is beneficial to you. So let me back up just a little bit. When you're planting the tubers, they recommend that they be 6 to 8 inches below the surface of the soil. And that's true unless you have clay soil, in which case you should do the hill method or only go down a couple inches and then hill a little bit above that. If you bury a tuber 8 inches into clay soil, you may never see a plant. You might get lucky and it'll grow and be fine. But clay soil is going to hold a lot of moisture when you dig them up. If they live, you're going to see a lot of what they call lenticels on the tuber itself. And it just looks like little raised bumps. A lot of people think that it's a disease, and it's not. It's the tuber's way of trying to get rid of some of that excess moisture that it's been placed in that it doesn't like. Um, I did talk about waiting until the soil's 60 degrees. You definitely want to choose a site that's got 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. Afternoon or early day shade is fine, but that middle of the day, they're going to want that daylight in the days that they're blooming during that period of time. You can start your tubers inside about a month or so before you plant them outside. You can do them in pots, or you can just do them in trays and cover them with soil and lift and separate. Um, Not the best way to do it, but it's possible. That's how a lot of people take cuttings from their tubers as they put them in a tray and they cover almost all of the tuber with soil, mixed with sand and compost, just a little bit, not a lot of compost, because you don't want it to be soggy. And you just mist the the soil maybe weekly to give them enough moisture to push those buds and push a little bit of stem growth. And then you can take a cutting, you can cut it right at the tuber and place that in a rooting compound and in either sand or um, a good peat mix or um, pro mix. Then dome it, put a dome over it, and have it in an area that it can be direct sun, but filtered sun. So you'll want to use a little bit of shade cloth over the area. Um, and just keep that moist, water from below, and open the dome periodically and mist it with a spray bottle. And your tubers will root and, or I'm sorry, your cuttings will root and create tubers likely before you even plant them in the ground. If you don't get tubers from cuttings, if that's a problem that you've had in the past, there's a requirement that the cutting has. It needs to have fewer than 12 hours of daylight or sunlight for at least a period of time. So the mistake that a lot of people make is they're doing their cuttings in the same place that they're doing their seedlings, and the seedlings require 14 to 16 hours worth of sun or light. So they're leaving these grow lights on, and then the cuttings are never producing tubers because they go from the greenhouse straight into the ground. By the time they get into the ground, day length is longer, and there's never an organic time in which they're going to get that less than 12 hours until fall. And then there's not quite enough time for them to put on the kind of growth they need below the ground. They've got plenty of roots, but they're not going to have tubers if they don't get that shortened daytime. And I mitigate that with the shade cloth. That limits the amount of full sun that they're getting and gives you an opportunity for your cuttings to start little teeny tiny adorable tubers before you even put them in the ground. Um, let's see. Spacing. When you're planting the tubers in the ground, like I said, when I first started, I was doing them 2 feet apart. And I was noticing I was getting a lot of tipping. Um, yes, I had these beautifully round plants and fairly good um, flower production, average flower production, I guess. I have narrowed it down, and I typically do around a foot apart. And I say around because I base my spacing on the average tuber size of the variety that I'm planting. Um, for the tubers that I sell, I plant no less than 50 plants of each variety. So I have a good representation and a good idea of the size of the tubers before I ever even put them in the ground. I've divided them and have seen what they look like. I select out the ones that I want to plant here, set them aside, and then the rest I sort and grade them for selling. Um, I take the length of a tuber, I double it, and then I add 4 to 6 inches. And the reason for that is your tuber is only the size of 1/2 of what is going to be growing below ground. So by doubling it, you're actually getting a good representation of the entire width of the tuber clump when you dig it up. And when you add 4 to 6 inches, you're adding on a little bit of growth space for that tuber clump to have its own reservoir of nutrients coming from the soil. There's macro, micro nutrients. There's all these fun things that go on below the ground that need to happen in order for your plants to thrive. And if you put a tuber that's 6 inches long, 6 inches from another tuber, when your tubers grow, they're going to cross a little bit, almost like interlacing your fingers. So then when you go to pull them out of the ground, you're going to be sort of trying to pull them apart a little bit, which means that they've been crowded a little bit too much. So that's something to just be mindful of when you're planting. When I plant, I do try to amend the soil with manure, compost. We get our manure from a local dairy farmer, and they bring it by the tractor trailer load. Then, which is not expensive. Um, then we leave it in a pile for a year, mix it with other things on the farm, add some alfalfa pellets, rabbit food basically. That helps get some good heat in the soil. And we plan to also start adding the wood chips that we're getting to the soil, to the compost, and using that as a compost slash mulch when we plant. But you can also add a little bit of bone meal or blood meal to the soil when you plant if that's something that you're comfortable with doing. The tubers will love it. It can be costly if you have 4,000, 5,000 tubers like I do. Um, but if you're only growing a few or less than 100, that's at least reasonable that you could put a teaspoon or so with each one when you grow it. So there's this overwhelming need to know what goes on below ground from a lot of people. Um, when I plant my tubers, there's loss. There's always going to be loss. You can plant a tuber that looks 100% perfectly healthy. It's got a bud started. It might even have a little bit of a shoot started, and you bury it in the soil, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, and you're thinking something should have happened by now. I'm going to dig this up and look at it. All you're doing is disrupting the relationship between that tuber, any little root hairs that may have started to grow, and the soil in which it's growing. If it's going to live, you've just set it back. If it's not going to live, digging it up didn't make it better. It's one of those things that's really hard, that we all like to know what's going on underground. We all love to look at that photo that gets surrounded with the glass and the seed that gets planted, and you can see the roots growing and you can see the cotyledon open, and it's fun and exciting in a scientific way. But in reality, if you dig up everything you plant and then expect it to be a big beautiful plant, you're going to be upset and disappointed. So I definitely don't recommend digging them up to see how they're doing. Once the plants start to grow, um, after they are about a foot tall or a little bit more, I recommend going in and pinching the center. There's meristematic tissue in the growing tips of every plant. Dahlias are no different. And what you want to do is you want to go in and snip out just above a leaf union, about 3 or 4 inches of the top. If you leave 6 inches of plant, it'll be fine. What's going to happen is you're telling that plant to put the energy into the lower portion of the plant. You're going to encourage longer stems. You're going to encourage more blooms, and you're less likely to have plants tipping over with the slightest breeze or a rainstorm that comes through with a little bit of wind. Um, it it's impractical to think that I'm out there pinching back all 5,000 of my plants. It doesn't get done. I do my best to go out and pinch them back and still keep up with weeding and all of the other things that go along with running a farm. But it is, if you're a smaller scale and or you have hired help that can help get that task done, that's great. Disbudding is also another practice that's common. It's most common in people who are growing for either shows or they're growing to sell to florists, because it will create a single stem bloom without two little buds growing up along next to it. So by disbudding, what I don't mean is to go in and cut that center bud out that's going to be your big, beautiful bloom. Typically with dahlias, there's two stems that will grow up alongside of it with buds on them. Those are the two. If you pinch them off when they're tiny, like smaller than a dime, then your center one will get a longer, stronger stem. The bloom itself will be bigger, and I think it affects the color a little bit as well, a little bit richer color, because all the energy is now going into that bloom instead of divided among three. It's not the end of the world if you don't pinch them, but again, if you're going to show or you have an event coming up that you're doing flowers for, it's going to be helpful and you're going to be happy with your results. So through The next thing I guess I want to talk about is fall and winter care. In the fall is when you're going to get most of your blooms. You're going to be amazed at the number of blossoms that your plants will produce. I find it difficult to keep up with harvest during the month of September and October. Sometime around the mid to end of October in my particular area, which is Lyons, New York, um, I think around the 18th is when they say we're going to get our first frost. But because we're up on a drumlin, the frost doesn't necessarily settle on the top of the hill. It settles in the lower parts. So it's sometimes into November before I'll get that first freeze. And that's what determines when I'm done, is when the plants get frozen, whether it be from snow or from a really good healthy frost that hits, that determines the end. Now, there's two ways that you can go about preparing your plants for winter storage. One is to go through and cut off all the foliage, remove it from the field, and wait 2 to 3 weeks. The waiting 2 to 3 weeks allows the tubers to cure. It allows them to prepare themselves for winter storage. They toughen up a little bit. They get the coating that whatever that natural coating is that's on them that helps prevent disease. If it's left there, it's amazing and it works well. Leave them in the soil anyways for 2 to 3 weeks, after which time you can dig them up. I use a 4-tine fork to dig mine, the flat tined ones, so that you not like a round pitchfork, but the flat tined ones. That allows the soil to move through as I'm digging, and you grab just the tubers and it kind of pops them out a little bit. I try to at least be a foot away from where the stem of the plant is. Again, keeping in mind, if you know that the tubers it produces are much bigger, you're not going to want to try to pop that plant out with one dig of the fork. You're going to want to go around the plant a couple of times to establish some looseness, or you're going to break the necks of the tubers as they come out of the ground. And the structure of a tuber is such that there is a body of the tuber, which is the main part that looks like a potato, and then a slender neck. And then at the end of the neck, there's a bulge where that attaches to either another portion of the stem that grows below ground or the actual stem itself. Um, it, no matter how deep you plant them, they will still grow up to the surface. And you'll see where there's stem and you have to stop cutting that stem because you've come into contact with where the tuber attaches. So you want all of those three parts to be intact. If the neck breaks, then it's not going to have the food source that it needs in the spring in order to grow. So how you dig them is important. Don't don't be rough with them. Don't take them out and like shake them really hard to get the soil off. When I lift mine, um, I give them a little tap with the handle of the tool that I'm using to dig, and I mean a very light tap, and most of the soil falls off. Another approach is to cut down the foliage, leave it on top of the stems that you cut, and wait your 2 to 3 weeks and remove it then. A third way is to just leave the foliage on the plants, which is the way I now do it. And the reason I leave it is that I have such a wet fall, a lot of snow, a lot of rain, and I've noticed that when I cut the stem, because dahlia stems are hollow, some of that weather gets in there. And it doesn't take much. If it gets in there and then it freezes, it expands. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. When it expands, it will break apart the inside of the structure of the tubers below ground. Now, it may help you divide. It may burst just enough to push things apart without actually freezing the tubers themselves, but it's not likely. It's likely that it's at least going to make them cold enough that it makes them more susceptible to some form of rot, or it's going to freeze them and then they're just going to rot. Um, but that's what I've learned and why I leave the stems now. So my practice is leave the stems, go through, dig them, use the stem to help lift it out of the ground. I tap it lightly with the handle of the fork, very lightly. Then I set it aside until I've got all of that variety pulled. I go back through with my DeWalt cutters. I have the battery operated cutters that can cut through bigger things and cut the stems, toss them aside in a pile. And the next most important thing, if you only grow one of something, buy flag tape, write the name on it, tie it around the stem, leave enough of the stem when you initially dig it to have that ribbon stay on there. No one ever said I labeled too much or I have too many labels. I I can't stress enough the importance of the labeling. You may not care what the names are, but you might care if you have 10 clumps of tubers, 5 of which are the same, and the other 5 are all different varieties, and now you only want one of each, one plant of each, and you throw away the wrong clumps because you didn't have them labeled. It's just simple. I not only try to label the stems when I have singles or even 2 or 3, but I label the bin that I put them in. Um, I have crates that I put them in, and I will put painter's tape on the handle of the crate and write on it with the big Sharpie so that it's easily readable from the storage area. Um, Once they're dug, they all go in the bin, root hairs and all. They go in the basement of our barn. I usually try to split the day so that I'm only digging half of the day. And then last year, all I did was just put them in the barn and call it a day. This year, I'm going to go down and at least trim stems and root hairs off of what I dug up in the morning. That way, when they sit in the basement of the barn to cure, which is something they need to cure. They need to let all the moisture dry off of them, all the wet, all the mud. And when you're trimming those root hairs off is when you can knock off most of the soil that's still on them. I have a blade that I use for sharpening my cutters as I go because you will dull them. I do not wash my tubers. I have in the past, I've tried it, and they're beautiful. They're very pretty when they're clean. However, they're also susceptible to more disease now, more fungal diseases because you've washed off the natural coating that they have to help protect them from that. They're also more susceptible to freezing before you get them into your storage space because you have to leave them out to let them dry. They have to be dry or they will rot. Let's see. Definitely labeling. So then it goes into, once I get them into the storage area and everything is dug from the field, what I'm going to have is a bin full of, or 2 or 3 bins full of the same variety that has no root hairs on it. The stems have been cut off, and now I need to go through and divide them. You can do a couple things. You can go through initially and maybe just split them in half. It makes them easier to manage. They'll fit into they'll fit into a tray better. I don't store most of my tubers in any kind of medium. I'm fortunate in that I have decent air circulation in the room that they go in, and I have water the drainage from the barn and the roadside comes in on the floor of the room that they're in, and they have to, they get their moisture from there. I go down regularly and check on things in the room. Oh, frankly, I'm down there most of the winter dividing anyway, off and on. And the question about the photosanitary for out of state. So you have to be registered as a nursery in order to sell tubers. And there's an inspector that comes out, and there are different recommendations for each state. If I was going to sell to, I think it's Arizona, and I know California, there's a special inspection that has to happen. And they will literally come out and inspect the tubers that you plan to ship. And in that case, they probably would have to be washed and all soil remnants be removed. But it doesn't have to happen before they go into winter storage. They can be stored over winter in their natural state because you wouldn't ship them out during a period of time in which they could freeze. So I think that that pretty much covers anything unless someone can think of something else they wanted to ask, or if you want to just open it up for questions.
I think it'd be great if we could open up for questions. If anyone wants to just put it in the chat, we can I'm happy to read them out, or feel free to